Okay, guys, it's been a very, very long time until I recorded the last podcast episode of the King of Weighted Coaching Cues podcast. We decided to remake the format in a more interview-based style, also recording it as a video and doing it together. And also, as you hear, in English. So to the German community, I'm sorry, but we got a lot of feedback that also all the international followers want to listen to our words. So we are sticking to English in this one, and we are coming back with a very interesting topic. And on this weekend, there was the final first World Championship in weighted calisthenics here in Berlin. I had the honor to be the moderator of the live stream. Alois was one of the head judges, responsible actually for almost the whole second day of judging the competition. And today we want to talk about what the main technical difficulties, technical problems in all the lifts of the competition were that we saw and that we want to talk about to help you to avoid these mistakes if you also feel like you are one of them. And yeah, let's get it started. Let's start with the first lift, which was the muscle up.
Yeah, so shall we start with the girls or with the men, as we have the ring muscle up for the girls?
Let's start with the bar muscle up. I think the ring muscle up can be a whole extra episode for itself.
All right. So we have the classic order of the muscle up, followed by the pull up and chin up, followed by the dip and the squat. So the competition order of the lifts. And in the muscle up, one of the main things that we could see that has been done incorrectly or not appropriate to competition rules was the knee kick. So this was also judged very strictly, and during the competition it was allowed to use some kind of knee kick as long as it does not assist in getting over the bar. So a slight knee bend would have been valid, but too big of a knee kick wouldn't be valid. And this is also one of the main things that we have spotted in the competition.
And from your trainer perspective, if someone repetitively makes this wrong, what would be your advice? What would be your cue? As we of course want to help our listeners to avoid this. So how would you teach someone to keep the legs straight in like despite only getting stronger, of course?
Of course. So we need to take into account that these athletes were lifting with some real heavy weights and they're working very close to their maximum potential. So some deviation in form will be likely. So there is no other way around. When we're talking about perfect technique, we always need to have some kind of intensity gap. What I mean with this, so you should not work very close to failure, because then taking care of your form might be almost impossible. But in general, when you want to improve your body tension in the muscle up, it is very useful to practice the muscle up with a lighter intensity. So really trying to implement body weight muscle ups or muscle ups with slightly reduced load and working on the explosiveness. And when you work on the explosiveness, also your pulling height will increase, and so you don't need that compensations from the legs anymore. And that would be my main thing that I would recommend to do if you if you're having problems with your body tension in the muscle ups.
Mm-hmm. The main thing that I recognize what a lot of athletes were doing, like not wrong, but not optimal, was their pulling timing, which often also comes together with a bit of knee kick to correct the pulling direction. Now it gets a bit complicated to explain this, but when we're looking at a muscle up, we're swinging forward, and in the point of return or shortly after, we want to initiate our pull to really have that upward force with a bit of rotation to get over the bar. What happened to also very, very experienced athletes is that they pulled a bit too early. That means the athlete swing in, swing in, and shortly before the point of return, they started to pull up. That means the weight was still moving forward and they needed the knee kick to correct the path of the weight. And this happened to actually every second athlete, at least. That was really happening a lot. And same as you said, that is something you can really easily practice with a lot of repetition, meaning a lot of sets of muscle ups with very light intensity, just to really program that movement pattern with the correct timing, because you need to relearn it on every stage of intensity again, which makes it pretty hard, as a muscle up with 10 kg feels different than a muscle up with 15, than a muscle up with 20, versus a bodyweight muscle up, as your center of mass is always different, and so the timing feels a bit different. Meaning it's a hell lot of practice that is needed, but timing was definitely the main issue that I recognized athletes can easily improve.
Yeah, and on the other hand, we didn't see that many hip kicks, so I was surprised by that. And yeah, but overall, the technique in the muscle ups was actually pretty good. As
Yeah, I mean, we're
anyway.
talking about a world's.
Yeah, so
So we're always talking about the best of the best
sure.
now. So the critic is on a very top level. Let's put it like this.
Exactly. And yeah, that's the main things that I spotted for myself, since most people didn't had any issues with the transition, or less with the transition.
Yeah,
But-
usually it was just insufficient pulling height.
Exactly, and this is already something we talked about.
Then let's go over to pull-ups and chin-ups. Like, I would say the least technical lift of all four. So probably not too much analysis to be done here. First of all, I think the majority of non-French athletes did chin-ups as expected, as for most the closing top part is easier. Most of the French athletes did pull-ups because that's what they are used to and what they are doing like for a very long time, so they're stronger in it. Did you spot some technical mistakes on either chin-ups or pull-ups, especially as a judge, as you saw that pretty good from your perspective?
So as I was responsible for the closing part, so if the athletes had the chin over the bar or not, it was really hard for me to focus on other things during at the time I was judging. So, but in general, what I could see was that many athletes didn't read the rule book properly, because there was the rule that when you're starting with a depressed scapula, so in an active hang, you're not allowed to go into a passive hang and then pull, because that is kind of a downward movement.
So like using the bounce.
Exactly, so using some kind of momentum. And this is actually like a stretch reflex that you can use to accelerate your lift off in the pull-up, which will also make the closing a tiny bit easier. And this is something that happened actually a couple of times. But yeah, that was one of the things that I spotted. And in general,
What would you suggest for training this, like especially in the peaking phase shortly before the competition?
So, yeah, you always should practice the competition lifts regarding the competition rules. So you can have one session per week, for example, where you're practicing your regular pull-ups, and one session per week where you're going to practice your competition pull-ups, and you're going to do them like they should be done in the competition. So you can either start in the passive hang then, and then accelerating from there, or starting from the depressed hang. But when you're starting from a deep pressed hang, you need to stay in this deep pressed position, and you need to try to avoid in getting out of that position and losing that tension.
What I think also killed the performance a bit of a lot of athletes, also our athlete Haruna was not used to it, was the long time, like you got a start command when you were allowed to pull, and until that you needed to hang. And sometimes, depending on how the weight moved, how focused the command judge was, it was up to like 3 seconds of a hang that you had, which feels like 1 minute when you are the competitive athlete, and that really drains you. And then lifting off explosive with a max load on the belt, that was very hard for most of the athletes. And that is also something what I think I took away from the competition with prepping our athletes the next time is working with longer hang times in before that sub-max singles that we will have in the weeks before the competition. So also if you are looking forward to compete, and if you know that there will be a starting command to pull, you should definitely practice with a longer hang phase in before. That will get you used to it and not kill your planned weights in the competition, because a lot of athletes I think needed to decrease their opener weight a bit to be able to pull this weight easily over the bar.
Definitely, I totally agree with that.
Then, what else do we saw? Like as I said, that the pull-up and the chin-up are not too technically, so you cannot do too much wrong. Sometimes we had very, very flared elbows, which kills the leverage at the top position a bit. So if these athletes would focus a bit more on having elbows in, they might have a stronger top position, but close to 1 rep max or at your 1 rep max. It's hard to say if it's really, a technical mistake or if it's just not strong enough on that day. But that was something that I spotted a lot. But other than that, chin-ups, pull-ups, easy lift. So let's go over to probably the most technical upper body lift, or at least on one stage with the muscle up, is the dip. And here we could also see any kind of technical breakdown. Mm-hmm. What was the one, probably already know what you're going to say, what was the number one technical mistake that you spotted?
Of course, the depth of the dips. So we had plenty of athletes dipping above 90-degree elbow flexion, and in the competition it was said that you need to have the posterior delt just below the elbow cap, and some people were dipping really borderline, so just to 90 degrees elbow flexion, which is not enough. So you need to really have the rear delt parallel with the elbow cap, and this was definitely the mistake that we have spotted the most.
And most of the athletes were not conditioned to the correct depth, basically.
Exactly, but this is also due to the different competition rules through all over the world, because some federations, they only need to go down towards 90-degree elbow flexion, but not having the rear delt below the elbow. So not everybody was aware of that. And so that was the main.
In your opinion, what's the better rule? Like 90-degree, descending upper arm, rear delt below elbows? What's your favorite, if you could choose?
If I could choose, personally, I would say 90 degrees.
90 degrees? Yeah. And where is the point that you would measure it?
So, okay, when, let's say, the medial part of the elbow should be at the shoulder joint, in line with each other.
Makes it also hard to see in the end. So I actually have no opinion on this. As a good dipper, of course, a bit higher would be good for me.
Of course, because the force production will be way higher this way.
As a judge, I think is like rear delt below elbow is like something that you can it's like a clear point.
Definitely, yeah.
Which makes it easier to judge.
I definitely agree with those competition rules. as they are. And I do like them because it gives a standard to the whole industry. And yeah, so also the athletes have to adjust a little bit. So it's like the same with powerlifting. They're also implementing now the elbow rule in the bench press.
Yeah.
And this is also something that is important for our sport. So we have a standardized rule in the dip. And yeah, so
What
totally go
surprised
with
me a bit in the dip was, as we had like the moderation booth was in front of the dip, so I always had a front view on the dip. Lois was standing on the side, so you basically always had the side view. Is that like a good portion of the athletes had a super wide setup.
Yeah.
Like they had a very, and you could choose the width of the bars on your own, so you don't need to go for a very wide setup. And all of these, not all of these, but like the majority of these that shows the very wide setup, due to the high stability efforts in the depression, also sucked in depression. So I was not sure if they were not aware of it, if they are just used to a wide setup, because most of the commercial gym setups are pretty wide. But if they would have chosen just a more narrow setup, their depression would have been much stronger, and the whole dip would have been more stable, and probably also they could move more weight. So that was something setup-wise that I think a lot of athletes can improve just by dipping on a proper setup. Of course, it's also what you're used to, what feels comfortable for you, but I was surprised that a lot of athletes chose this wide width, because it's obviously not beneficial in the most cases.
Yeah, but most of these athletes were actually pretty tall, and for people with longer arms, this would shorten the range of motion they need to go through. And that would be
at least a bit. But you could also compensate this by just rotating the elbows a bit more out.
Sure, that would also work. But having a more chest dominant dip is the best for calisthenics athletes, as we are more shoulder dominant in our training, or most of the time. Yeah.
But that was definitely something I think that a lot of people could improve. Then we had, for of course not the strongest dippers, but for like in the middle field, they had some timing issues in the negative. In the positive part of the dip, with opening chest up too early. And there we also saw some no reps. So they bounced in, and in that bottom position, they already retracted shoulders and tried to like get their sternum up again, and did that too early before positioning themselves better. And they, almost all of them, were not able to make it up again. So keeping chest tight long enough until you're really in a good position to start your positive was also something that could have been done better.
Definitely, yeah.
Training-wise, how would you tackle this when someone has like a not of a too stable bottom position?
So what I generally do is that I program pause dips.
Surprise.
So it's actually quite easy.
Yeah.
So you just need to pause in the bottom position and really focusing on keeping maximum protraction and maximum shoulder stability. And by trying to open the chest up a little bit later will already help. So, but you need to focus on.
Maybe should we explain what closed and open chest in the context of a dip, because the term actually does not explain what actually happens. So should I just?
Yeah, go ahead.
So when we're talking about a closed chest, we are talking about a position with depressed, protracted shoulders where the sternum slightly points down. So a position where we are pretty small, and it kind of looks like you're closing yourself. So you're making yourself small. Sternum slightly points down, or at least not upright. Shoulders protracted, shoulders depressed. And when we're talking about an open chest, we're talking about an upright sternum and retracted shoulders, because now like my whole chest is open and now it's closed. That's where these terms are coming from. which might be a bit confusing for someone who's not aware of this kind of internal calisthenics term.
Exactly. So, and then you're basically waiting. When you're in this bottom position, you focus on that max protraction and the shoulder stability, and then you are going to push, and as soon as your sternum becomes a little bit more vertically to the floor, you can start opening your chest up and aligning your hips with the weight path again, and this would definitely help most people in getting rid of losing the tension in the bottom position of the dip.
Yeah. And keeping that chest tight until you're a bit more upright is needed, because if you look at the side view of a dip and you're open up in that position, so shoulders are moving back, what happens is you're basically coming down. So you're increasing the range of motion of the weight, and you're making the difficultest or the most difficult position of the dip even more difficult. Whereas when you are upright again and you open, then you're giving your chest more length, and so a bit more power potential to press up. But that is highly technical, advanced dip stuff. Why it's also, that's why it's a so technical lift, basically, because there's a lot of details with which you can really improve your technique on it, which also makes the dip, I think, the most coaching demanding lift from the upper body, at least.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. All right, and lastly, we had the squats.
Which is basically also maybe a total episode, but like let's stick to it.
What was the number one mistake you spotted?
I was very surprised that I saw, I think, at least 10 to 20% of athletes not squatting with full equipment. So there were a lot of athletes squatting without knee sleeves, which like automatically cuts, I think, statistically like 5 kg or something, depending on the sleeve, maybe even more. And even a few squatted without a belt, like, which I think is pretty hardcore in a 1 rep max squat, as that like cuts down your stability so much, and is probably not the best idea if you really want to hit good numbers. So that was something that surprised me, and that is of course not a technical mistake because you are allowed to do that. But for a 1 rep max competition, that is not meant in a bad way, but that is a bit stupid because you're wasting potential just by not wanting to use equipment.
Exactly, that's true, yeah. And the most no reps that we gave were due to death.
Yeah, I can relate.
Yeah. So, yeah, but that's actually a highly individual thing. That comes down to mobility and how you're training your squats. And this is actually something that is happening all the time and you can't avoid at all.
What we saw with some of the girls, at least more with the girls than with the boys, was that confidence played a big role. So like we saw squats from the male athletes that were like 100% shrimped up, and there was no sign that they are giving up. Like there was the option of passing out or standing up. Like that was so much fun to see in such a good energy, because like that was really max effort squat. And with most of the females, you saw that they, when they were at like kind of 95% or something, they just stopped and rather not took the grind and just accepted the no rep. That was something that I saw with, of course not all, but with some of the girls.
Yeah, but I think that also comes down to training experience. So if you're not training that long, you're not able to grind that properly, because more advanced athletes, even though they think they can't do one more repetition, most of the time they still can get one single rep out of it, because they are able to push them beyond their own barriers. And
maybe also training company, like,
Yeah.
you know, if you have someone that really helps you pushing the boundaries.
And that's true, yeah. And it's also a competition. So you're a little bit nervous, all those feelings contributing to it. And therefore, yeah, I totally understand that not everyone is able to grind through those lifts. But this is also something that needs to be learned and over time.
Yeah, for me, actually, competitions helped a lot with learning that, because that is an environment where you have like at least 3. If you're lifting heavy, you have 5 spotters, so nothing can happen. You have a crowd that is supporting you, really helping you to push you towards max performance. And in competition, my last attempt is usually like 20-25 kgs heavier than my last peaking single squat, which also feels like something at 9, at 10. But there's so much more potential in you with the right grinding environment. And this is definitely something, as Alois said, what you can learn and what you need to learn if you want to be strong in competitions. So, summing that up, we had muscle ups, mostly timing and load management issues. So a lot of athletes just overpaced on the weight. Chin-ups and pull-ups, just people not reading the rule book was most of the time the main issues. Dips, we had depth, setup, shoulder depression, and timing in the reverse point as the main issues. Squatting, we had equipment, confidence, and depth with what the main difficulties of the athletes were. And I think that is enough for today, and gives also the listeners a lot to think about, and maybe also improve in their next competition. So then, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, as we're also now uploading this to YouTube. And if you have ideas, wishes for new episodes, we're now trying to get you at least one per week. I think we haven't talked about it, but is one per week? Can we do that?
Sounds good, yeah.
Yeah. Then
Exactly. Then
see you next week.
see you next time.